The stars around Horizon's edge had always been quiet. The trade station floated in neutral space, far from any empire's border, far from any war. It was a place where species came to talk, to trade, to pretend that the galaxy was at peace. For a long time, that pretending had worked. Not today. Tejo stood on the bridge of the human warship Harang and stared at the main screen. His hands were behind his back, and his face showed nothing. But inside his chest, his heart was beating faster than it should. On the screen, hundreds of ships filled the darkness like a swarm of metal insects. They were Velkari. Every single one of them carried enough firepower to turn a small moon into dust. The Velkari Dominion had come to Horizon's edge, and they had not come to trade. "Sir," said Yuna from her station. She was the first officer, and she had been with Tejo for almost 4 years now. She was calm in every situation he had ever seen, but even her voice had a small shake in it today. "The Velkari fleet is holding position around the station. I count 312 warships. 40 of them are heavy cruisers." Tejo said nothing for a moment. He just looked at the screen. "And how many ships do we have in this sector?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "One, sir," Yuna said. "Us." The bridge was silent. Everyone heard those words, and everyone understood what they meant. The Harang was not a small ship. It was a proper warship, built in the orbital yards above Earth, designed to fight and to survive. But it was one ship. One ship against more than 300. Tejo turned and looked at the rest of his crew. Daesun sat at the weapons console. He was a large man with thick arms and a face that always looked like he was angry, even when he was not. Right now, though, he actually was angry. His fingers moved over his controls, checking the status of every gun, every missile tube, every energy battery on the ship. At the engineering station, Ji Woo was already pulling up system reports. She was the youngest officer on the bridge, barely 26 years old, but she knew the Harang better than anyone. She had once repaired a broken power line during a hull breach with nothing but a metal clip and a piece of wire. The crew still talked about it. And at the pilot's chair sat Hana. She was small, quiet, and had a habit of not speaking unless she had something important to say. But when she flew the Harang, the ship moved like it was alive. Tejo had seen many pilots in his career. Hana was the best. "Open a channel to the station," Tejo said. The communication officer worked quickly, and a moment later, a voice came through. The station manager, an alien from the Pelori species, was speaking so fast that his translator could barely keep up. "Please, anyone, this is Horizon's Edge. The Velkari have surrounded us. They are demanding we hand over all cargo and all residents from the Outer Rim territories. They are threatening to fire if we do not agree within 1 hour. We have 12,000 civilians on board. Please, if anyone can hear this, we need help." The message repeated, again and again. It played on every open channel in the sector, crying out into the black emptiness of space. And every species in the region heard it. Tejo knew this because the long-range sensors showed him what was happening. Far away, at what they considered a safe distance, there were other fleets. The Runali had 6 ships. The Terevian Collective had 12. Even the mighty Selhari Empire had sent a battle group of 20 warships to observe the situation. Every single one of them. And not one of them was moving. "Sir," Yuna said, reading the same data, "the Allied fleets are holding position at the outer boundary. None of them are responding to the distress call." Tejo looked at her. "None?" "None," she confirmed. He turned back to the screen. He understood why. The Velkari Dominion was powerful, and no one wanted to be the first to challenge them. If someone attacked and failed, the Velkari would remember. They would come for that species next. So everyone just floated in the dark and watched and waited for someone else to be brave first. It was always like this. In every war, in every crisis, in every dark moment in the history of the galaxy, everyone waited, everyone calculated, everyone thought about the cost and the risk and the politics. And while they thought, people died. Tejo had spent 20 years in the human navy. He had fought in 3 wars and survived things that should have killed him. He had buried friends. He had written letters to families telling them their loved ones were not coming home. And every single time, the thing that hurt the most was not the fighting. It was the waiting. It was knowing that something terrible was happening, and doing nothing about it. He could not do nothing. Not today. Not with 12,000 lives counting down their last hour. "Daesun," he said quietly. The weapons officer looked up. "Sir? Bring all weapons online. Full combat readiness." Daesun did not hesitate. His fingers moved, and across the entire ship, systems woke up. Gun turrets rotated into position. Missile tubes loaded. Energy batteries hummed with power. The harangue was ready to fight. "Jiwoo," Tejo said next. "Already on it, sir," she replied. Her hands flew over her console, reinforcing forward shields, rerouting auxiliary power to the armor plating. "I am also warming up the backup generators in case we lose the main ones." Tejo almost smiled. Jiwoo always thought 3 steps ahead. "Hana," he said finally. The pilot turned in her chair and looked at him. Her eyes were steady. She did not ask what he was planning. She did not need to. She already knew. "Plot a course," Tejo said. "Straight through the Velkari fleet, directly to the station." The bridge went completely still. Every officer, every crew member, every person on that bridge stopped what they were doing and looked at their captain. A course straight through 300 enemy warships. It was not a plan. It was madness. But Hana simply nodded. "Course plotted, sir," she said, and her voice did not waver even a little. Tejo looked at his crew one last time. These people trusted him. These people would follow him into the fire, because that was what humans did. They did not wait for someone else to be brave. They went first. "All hands," Tejo said, his voice carrying through every room, every hallway, every corner of the Haran. "This is the captain. We are moving to engage the Velkari fleet and protect Horizon's Edge. It will not be easy. But we are not here because things are easy. We are here because it is right. All stations, prepare for combat." He sat down in his chair and gripped the armrests. "Hana," he said, "take us in." The Haran's engines roared to life, and the ship surged forward into the darkness, alone, toward an army that could swallow it whole. Behind them, every fleet in the sector watched in stunned silence as one small human warship flew straight toward the impossible, and the galaxy held its breath. The harangue moved fast. Its engines burned hot and bright, leaving a long trail of blue light behind it, like a comet falling through the night. On every sensor screen in the sector, every species, every fleet, every captain and admiral watched that single bright dot racing toward the wall of Velkari warships. No one could believe what they were seeing. On the bridge of the Runali flagship, the admiral stood with all 4 of his arms hanging loose at his sides. His mouth was open. His translator was silent because he had no words to translate. He had served in the Runali Navy for 40 years. He had seen battles and wars and terrible things, but he had never seen anything like this. One ship, one single ship, charging into a fleet of 300. "What are the humans doing?" he whispered. No one answered him. On the Selhari Battle Group's command ship, the reaction was the same. The Selhari were known across the galaxy as warriors. They were proud of their military history and their strong ships. But even they had not moved toward the Velkari blockade. Even they had decided that the risk was too great. And now they watched as a species half their age, with ships half their size, did what they could not. The Sealhari commander stared at the screen and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt shame. Inside the harangue there was no time for shame or fear or anything else except the work. Taeho sat in his captain's chair and watched the distance between his ship and the Velkari fleet grow smaller with every second. Numbers on the screen counted down. 200,000 kilometers. 150. 100. They see us, Yuna reported from her station. Her voice was steady now. The shaking was gone. When the decision had been made, when the course was set, something changed in the crew. The fear did not disappear, but it stepped aside and let duty take its place. The Velkari fleet is reacting. Outer ships are turning to face us. I am reading weapons charging on at least 40 vessels. 40, Daesun repeated from the weapons console. He cracked his knuckles, which was a habit he had when he was about to do something violent. That is a lot of guns pointed at us. Then we better not fly in a straight line, Hana said from the pilot's chair. It was the most words she had spoken all day, and a few people on the bridge almost laughed. Almost. Daesun, Taeho said. What is our weapon status? All forward batteries are fully charged. Missile tubes 1 through 16 are loaded and ready. Point defense systems are active. I have also prepared the pulse cannons for close-range work, just in case we get close enough to use them. He paused, which based on our current course, we definitely will. Jiwoo, shields. Forward shields at maximum. I have pulled power from non-essential systems all across the ship. Lights in the lower decks are off. The gym is off. The kitchen is off. Everything that is not keeping us alive or helping us fight is shut down. We have about 30% more shield power than normal. She looked at Taeho with a small, tired smile. It is the best I can do, sir. It is more than enough, Taeho said. He meant it. 50,000 kilometers now. On the screen, the Velkari ships were no longer just dots. They had shape and form. They were ugly things, built for one purpose only. Their hulls were covered in weapons, rows and rows of gun turrets and missile ports, stacked on top of each other like the teeth of some giant metal beast. A single Velkari cruiser could fight 3 ships from most other species and win. And there were hundreds of them. The first shots came at 30,000 kilometers. Bright red beams of energy cut through space toward the harangue. They were warning shots, aimed close but not directly at the ship. The Velkari were telling them to stop, to turn around, to go back where they came from. Taeho did not even blink. Hold course, he said. Hana held course. At 20,000 kilometers, the Velkari stopped warning. The next wave of fire was real. Red beams and white missiles and blue plasma bolts came screaming across the black emptiness straight at the harangue. The space around the ship turned into a storm of light and death. Incoming fire, Yuna called out. Multiple impacts in 5 seconds. Hana, evasive pattern delta, Taeho ordered. Hana's hands moved on her controls, and the harangue danced. There was no other word for it. The ship twisted and rolled and turned in ways that something that large should not have been able to move. Beams of energy passed so close to the hull that the crew could feel the heat through the walls. Missiles flew past, missing by meters. Plasma bolts splashed against empty space where the ship had been just a half-second before. But not everything missed. A heavy beam struck the forward shields, and the whole ship shook. Lights flickered. A console on the left side of the bridge sparked and went dark. Jiwoo's fingers flew over her controls. Forward shields holding, she reported. Down to 82%, rerouting power from Section 7. Another hit, then another. The harangue shook each time like a giant hand was slapping it. But it kept moving. It kept flying forward. Daesun, Taeho said, return fire. Daesun had been waiting for those words. His face broke into a grim smile, and he pressed the firing controls. The harangue answered the Velkari with everything it had. Its forward batteries lit up the darkness with bright white beams that cut through the vacuum like blades. Missiles launched from the tubes in rapid succession, each one tracking a different target. The point defense guns rattled to life, shooting down incoming projectiles before they could reach the hull. The first Valkyrie ship to feel the harang's bite was a light cruiser on the outer edge of the formation. Daesun's beam cut across its bow, melting through armor and systems. The ship spun away, trailing fire and smoke, and the Valkyrie fleet saw something they had not expected. The human ship was not just charging blindly. It was fighting back, and it was fighting hard. On the galactic communication channels, chatter exploded. Every species was talking at once. Translators across a dozen languages tried to keep up with the flood of words. Shock, confusion, disbelief. And underneath all of it, something quieter. Something that no one wanted to admit yet. Admiration. The Runali admiral leaned forward in his chair. "Get me a direct line to our fleet captains." His officers looked at him in surprise, but they obeyed. On the Selhari command ship, the commander had not moved. He stood like a statue, watching the tiny dot of the harang push deeper and deeper into the Valkyrie formation. Fire came at it from every direction now, and still it moved forward. Still it fought. "Brave," the Selhari commander whispered. "Foolish, but brave." He turned to his officers. "Begin charging our weapons," he said, slowly. "Do not let the Valkyrie see." Back on the harang, the damage was starting to build. A missile had gotten through the point defense and struck the port side. 2 compartments on Deck 4 were open to space. Ji-Woo had sealed them instantly, but the ship was bleeding now. Warning lights blinked across her console like red stars. "Hull breach on Deck 4, Sections 9 and 10, Ji-Woo reported. "Emergency bulkheads are holding. Shields down to 61%. Taeho gripped the armrests of his chair as another hit rocked the bridge. A piece of ceiling panel fell and crashed on the floor near his feet. He kicked it aside. "How far to the station?" he asked. 12,000 kilometers, Yuna answered. "We are more than halfway through the fleet." More than halfway. They had flown through the heart of 300 warships, taking fire from every direction. And they were still alive, still moving, still fighting. It should not have been possible. The math said they should be dead already. But humans had never been very good at listening to math. "Sir," Yuna said, and something in her voice made Taeho look at her. She was staring at her screen with wide eyes. "I am picking up something on the long-range sensors. The Allied fleets, they are moving." Taeho turned to look at the main screen. Far behind them, beyond the edge of the Valkyrie formation, tiny dots of light were beginning to shift. The Runali, the Torevians, even the Selhari. Slowly, carefully, like animals coming out of hiding, the Allied fleets were starting to move toward the battle. It was not much, not yet, but it was a beginning. Taeho allowed himself one small breath. Then he looked forward again at the storm of fire and metal waiting for them. "Keep going," he said. "We are not done yet." The harang flew on, burning and bleeding and fighting, one ship against the galaxy's silence, daring everyone else to follow. The harang was burning, not in the way that stars burn, slow and steady and beautiful. It burned the way a wounded animal bleeds, in patches, in bursts, in ugly orange flames that flickered along its hull before the vacuum of space swallowed them. 3 decks had damage. 5 compartments were open to the void. The port engine was running at 60% power, because a Valkyrie beam had melted through 2 layers of armor and cooked the cooling system underneath. And still, the ship kept moving forward. Ji-Woo had not sat down in 20 minutes. She stood at her engineering console, her fingers moving so fast they were almost a blur. Every time something broke, she fixed it. Every time a system failed, she found another way to make it work. She pulled power from places no engineer was supposed to pull power from, she rerouted energy through paths that the ship's original designers had never imagined. At one point, she connected the backup lighting grid to the shield generator using a command sequence she wrote in her head in about 4 seconds. "That should not work," said the engineering assistant, standing next to her, staring at the screen. "It works," Jiwoo said flatly. "Do not question it. Just watch the temperature gauge and tell me if it goes above red." "It is already above red." "Then tell me if it goes above the red that is above red." That was how things were on the Harang now. Everything was broken, everything was on fire, and everything was somehow still working because one 26-year-old engineer refused to let her ship die. On the bridge, Tae-ho watched the battle unfold on the main screen. The Harang was deep inside the Valkyrie formation now, surrounded on all sides by enemy ships. The good news was that the Valkyrie could not use their heaviest weapons at this range without risking hitting their own ships. The bad news was that they had plenty of lighter weapons, and they were using all of them. Multiple contacts firing from bearings 040 and 270, Yuna called out. 6 ships closing from above, 4 from below. They are trying to box us in. "Hana," Tae-ho said. The pilot was already moving. She threw the Harang into a sharp roll that pressed everyone on the bridge sideways in their seats. The ship dove under a Valkyrie cruiser so close that the crew could see the individual panels on its hull through the viewport. Beams of energy crossed the space where the Harang had been just a moment before, and 2 of them hit Valkyrie ships instead. One of the enemy cruisers took a direct hit from its own ally and spun away with half its weapons array destroyed. "They just shot their own ship," Dae-sun said with a rough laugh. "I love this plan." "Return fire on the group to our right," Tae-ho ordered. "Missiles, full spread." Dae-sun obeyed. 8 missiles launched from the Harang's starboard tubes, fanning out in a wide pattern. They were not aimed to kill, they were aimed to scatter. The missiles flew into the group of Valkyrie ships on the right side, and even though most of them were shot down by enemy defenses, the remaining 2 struck a destroyer's engine section. The explosion forced the surrounding ships to break formation and pull away. A gap opened. Hana saw it before anyone else and drove the Harang through it like a needle through cloth. "Distance to station," Tae-ho said. 8,000 kilometers, Yuna replied. "We can see it on visual now." Tae-ho looked at the screen, and there it was. Horizon's edge. The trade station hung in space like a great silver wheel, slowly spinning. It was beautiful, in the way that all things built by many hands are beautiful. Dozens of species had helped build it over the centuries. It was supposed to be a symbol of peace, of cooperation, of the idea that the galaxy could be better than it was. Right now, it looked very small and very alone. "Sir," Yuna said, her voice dropping lower, "I am reading the Valkyrie flagship. It is positioned directly between us and the station." Tae-ho saw it. The flagship was enormous. It was easily 5 times the size of the Harang, a massive structure of dark metal and glowing red lights that looked less like a ship and more like a floating fortress. Its weapons were bigger than anything the Harang carried. A single shot from its main battery could cut the Harang in half. "Well," Dae-sun said, looking at the flagship on the screen, "that is a very big problem." "It is a very big target," Tae-ho corrected. Dae-sun looked at his captain. Then he shook his head slowly and turned back to his console. "You are completely insane, sir. Weapons ready." The Valkyrie flagship opened fire first. A massive beam of deep red energy shot across space toward the Harang. It was so bright that the bridge screens automatically dimmed to protect the crew's eyes. Hana threw the ship sideways, and the beam missed the main hull, but it caught the edge of the starboard shield. The shield flared white, then collapsed on that side completely. "Starboard shields are gone," Jiwoo reported instantly. "I need 90 seconds to bring them back." "You have 60, Tae-ho said. "Then I need 60 seconds, Jiwoo said without missing a beat. The Harang fired back. Daesun aimed everything at the flagship's weapon systems. Beams and missiles and pulse cannon shots pounded the massive ship's forward section. The flagship's armor held, but Daesun was not trying to destroy it. He was trying to blind it, to damage its targeting systems, to buy the Harang time to get past. Hana flew the ship in a spiraling pattern, using the debris from destroyed Valkyrie vessels as cover. Pieces of broken ships floated everywhere now, chunks of metal and glass and wire tumbling slowly through space. It was a graveyard, and Hana flew through it like it was a road she had traveled 100 times before. Another hit. This one struck the underside of the Harang, and the impact was so strong that Hana's console cracked. Sparks flew from the ceiling. Somewhere deep in the ship, a pipe burst, and steam filled a corridor on Deck 6. The emergency team was there in seconds, but the damage was done. "Hull integrity dropping," Jiwoo said. Her voice was still calm, but her eyes were not. She could feel the ship dying under her hands, piece by piece, system by system. Humans built their ships to take punishment that would break anything else in the galaxy. But even the toughest ship had limits. We cannot take many more hits like that. "We will not need to," Taeho said. He pointed at the screen. "Look." Behind them, far behind them but getting closer, the Allied fleets were moving with real purpose now. The Runali ships had formed a combat line. The Terevian ships were spreading into an attack formation. And the Selhari, the proud warriors who had been too careful to act, had brought their entire battle group to full speed and were heading straight for the Valkyrie flank. The Valkyrie had noticed too. On the communication channels, Valkyrie commanders were shouting orders at each other. Some ships on the outer edge of the formation were turning away from the Harang to face the new threat. The tight blockade around the station was starting to crack. Taeho had known this would happen. He had not charged into the Valkyrie fleet because he thought one ship could win against 300. He had charged because he knew that courage was like fire. It only needed one spark to start, and then it spread. The Harang was the spark. "Get us past the flagship," Taeho said. "Get us to the station." Hana nodded. She pushed the engines to full power, and the Harang screamed forward. The flagship fired again, and this time, the beam struck the top of the ship, carving a long black scar across the hull. Alarms screamed. A section of corridor on Deck 2 collapsed. But the ship held together, held by the strength of its metal and the will of the people inside it. They passed the flagship. They broke through. Horizon's edge was right in front of them now, close enough to fill the entire viewport. 12,000 civilians were in there, waiting and hoping and praying to whatever gods they believed in. "We are here," Yuna said softly. Taeho looked at the station. Then he looked at his crew. They were tired, bleeding, covered in dust and sweat. The bridge was half destroyed. The ship was barely holding itself together. "Position us between the station and the Valkyrie fleet," he ordered. "We are their shield now." The Harang turned and placed itself between the station and the enemy, one battered warship standing guard over 12,000 lives, and dared the Valkyrie to come closer. The Harang floated in front of Horizon's edge like a broken wall. Smoke and gas leaked from a dozen holes in its hull. Its armor was scorched and torn. One of its engine pods flickered on and off like a dying candle. From the outside, it looked like a ship that had already lost. From the inside, it was a ship that had no intention of losing. Taeho stood on his damaged bridge and watched the Valkyrie fleet on the main screen. The screen itself had a crack running down the middle, splitting the image into two halves, but it still worked. Like everything else on the Harang, it was broken and still doing its job. The Valkyrie flagship was turning. Its massive body rotated slowly in space, bringing its main weapons to face the harangue and the station behind it. The Valkyrie commander clearly intended to finish this. One human ship would not be allowed to embarrass the Dominion. "The flagship is charging its primary weapon," Yuna said. "Based on the energy readings, it will be ready to fire in approximately 2 minutes. 2 minutes. At full power, that weapon would destroy the harangue, and probably damage the station as well. 2 minutes was all they had." "Jiwoo," Taeho said. "Shield status?" "Forward shields at 23%, Jiwoo answered. She looked exhausted. Dark circles had formed under her eyes, and her uniform was covered in dust and the smell of burned wiring. "I can get them to maybe 30% if I shut down life support on the empty decks. But sir, at 30%, one direct hit from that flagship gun will go right through us." Taeho nodded. He had already known that. "Do it anyway. Every bit helps." He turned to Hana. The pilot sat in her chair with her hands resting lightly on the controls. She had not spoken much during the battle, but her flying had saved them more times than Taeho could count in the last hour. "Hana, I need you to listen carefully," Taeho said. "When that flagship fires, I need you to move us at the last possible moment. Not too early, or they will adjust their aim. Not too late, or we are dead. I need you to wait until the very last second." Hana looked at him. Her face was calm, and her eyes were focused. "How will I know when to move?" she asked. "You will know," Taeho said. "You always know." Hana nodded once and turned back to her controls. Her fingers tightened slightly on the stick. She was ready. "Dae-san," Taeho continued, "I need every missile we have left loaded and ready. When I give the order, I want you to fire all of them at the flagship, not at the hull, at the sensor arrays on its forward section. If we can blind it, even for a few seconds, it changes everything." Dae-san checked his inventory. "We have 14 missiles remaining, 6 standard, 4 armor-piercing, and 4 electronic warfare warheads." He paused. "The electronic warfare missiles can scramble their sensors for about 10 seconds if they hit the right spot. Then make sure they hit the right spot." 1 minute left. The flagship's main weapon glowed brighter and brighter, a deep red light building in its center like a star being born inside a machine. Every ship in the Valkyrie fleet had pulled back slightly, giving the flagship room to fire. They knew what was coming. And behind the Valkyrie fleet, the Allied ships were getting closer. The Solhari battle group was now within weapons range of the Valkyrie rear formation. The Runali combat line was sweeping in from the left. The Torevians were approaching from below. But they were still minutes away from being able to help. The harangue had to survive those minutes alone. 30 seconds. On the screen, the flagship's weapon reached full power. The red glow was so intense now that it lit up the surrounding space, casting long shadows across the hulls of nearby ships. "Dae-san," Taeho said, "fire everything." 14 missiles launched from the harang in rapid succession. They streaked across the gap between the two ships, small points of light racing toward the giant fortress ahead. The Valkyrie point defense systems activated, shooting down missile after missile. Explosions filled the space between the ships. 5 missiles were destroyed, then 3 more, then 2 more. 4 missiles got through. 2 of them were the electronic warfare warheads. They struck the flagship's forward sensor array and exploded in a burst of electromagnetic energy. The flagship's targeting systems went dark. Its sensors scrambled. For 10 precious seconds, the biggest ship in the Valkyrie fleet was blind. And the flagship fired anyway. The massive red beam erupted from the ship's main weapon, a column of energy so powerful that it distorted the space around it. But without sensors, without targeting, the beam was aimed at where the harang had been, not where it was going to be. Hana moved. She had been watching the flagship the entire time, not the screens, not the data, but the ship itself. She saw the moment the weapon released, the tiny flash of light at the barrel, a fraction of a second before the beam appeared. And in that fraction of a second, she pulled the harang sideways. The beam passed so close to the ship that the heat melted a strip of armor along the port side. Crew members in the corridors felt the temperature spike and threw themselves to the floor. Alarms screamed. Warning lights turned the hallways red. But the beam missed the core of the ship. It missed the bridge. It missed the reactor. It missed everything that mattered. The beam continued past the harangue and flew into empty space, wasting all of that terrible energy on nothing. On the bridge, no one moved for a full 2 seconds. Then Yuna let out a breath she had been holding. "We are alive," she said, as if she needed to say it out loud to believe it. "The flagship sensors are coming back online," Day-Sun reported. "They will be able to target us again in a few seconds." But a few seconds was all they needed, because in those few seconds, the Solhari battle group arrived. 20 Solhari warships came out of the darkness like a hammer falling on glass. They hit the Velkari rear formation with everything they had. Beams of bright blue energy cut through Velkari ships. Solhari missiles, heavier and more advanced than anything the harangue carried, slammed into cruisers and destroyers. The Velkari rear line crumbled in less than 30 seconds. The Velkari fleet panicked. Ships that had been focused on the harangue suddenly turned to face the new attack. Formations broke apart. Commanders shouted conflicting orders. Some ships tried to regroup around the flagship. Others tried to engage the Selhari. Others simply tried to get out of the way. And then the Runali arrived from the left, and the Torevians came from below. And suddenly, the Velkari were not surrounding anyone anymore. They were the ones being surrounded. On the bridge of the harangue, Tejo watched the battle change. What had been a hopeless fight was now something else entirely. The Allied fleets tore into the Velkari formation from 3 directions. Ships exploded. Formations collapsed. The tight blockade around Horizon's edge shattered like ice breaking in warm water. "Sir," Yuna said, and for the first time all day, she was smiling. "The Velkari flagship is pulling back. Multiple enemy ships are breaking off and retreating." Tejo watched the flagship turn its massive body away from the station and begin to move toward open space. It was retreating. The biggest, most powerful ship in the Velkari fleet was running. "Should we pursue?" Day-Sun asked. His blood was up, and his hands were still on the weapons controls. Tejo shook his head. "No, let them go. We are not here to destroy them. We are here to protect the station." Day-Sun's hands relaxed slowly. He nodded. "Understood, sir." The battle was not over yet. Pockets of Velkari ships still fought, trapped between the Allied fleets. But the result was no longer in question. The Velkari Dominion had come to Horizon's edge with 300 warships, and they were leaving with far fewer. Hana leaned back in her pilot's chair for the first time in over an hour. Her hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline finally wearing off. She closed her eyes for just a moment and let herself breathe. Ji-Woo sat down heavily on the floor next to her console. Her legs had given out, not from injury, but from exhaustion. She had been standing, running, and fighting for so long that her body had simply decided it was done. She sat there, on the cold metal floor, and watched the damage report scroll across her screen, already making a mental list of everything she would need to fix. Tejo looked at the station on the screen. Horizon's edge was still there, still spinning, still whole. 12,000 people were alive, because his crew had decided that waiting was not an option. He closed his eyes for just 1 second. Then he opened them, and got back to work. "Yuna, open a channel to the station. Tell them the blockade is broken, and they are safe. Then open a channel to the Allied fleet commanders. Thank them for their assistance." He paused. "And tell them it is about time they showed up." The battle ended not with a final explosion or a dramatic last stand, but with silence. The Velkari ships that could still fly turned and ran. They jumped into faster-than-light travel, one by one, disappearing from the sensors like candles being blown out. Within 20 minutes, the only Valkyrie ships left in the sector were the ones that would never fly again. Broken hulks drifting slowly through the darkness, leaking air and light into the cold emptiness of space. The Allied fleets held their positions for a while longer, scanning for any sign that the Valkyrie might return. But they did not return. The Valkyrie Dominion had come to Horizon's Edge with power and threats and the belief that no one would dare stand against them. They had been wrong. On the bridge of the harangue, the crew sat in silence. Not the tense silence of battle, not the focused silence of waiting. This was the silence that comes after everything is over. When the body and mind finally accept that the danger has passed, and the weight of what happened settles in like heavy rain soaking into dry ground. Taeho sat in his captain's chair. He had not moved from it in a long time. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, where a piece of falling metal had caught him. There was a thin cut on his forehead that had bled down the side of his face and dried there. He had not bothered to wipe it off. He looked around his bridge. It was a mess. Panels hung from the ceiling. 2 consoles were completely dead, their screens black and cracked. The floor was covered in dust, broken glass, and pieces of metal. The emergency lights gave everything a dim orange glow because the main lights had failed an hour ago, and Ji-woo had not had time to fix them yet. But his people were alive. Every single person on the bridge was alive. He could see them breathing, moving, existing, and that was enough. "Damage report," he said quietly. His voice was rough, like he had been shouting for hours, which he had. Ji-woo pulled herself up from the floor where she had been sitting. She walked to her console and brought up the numbers. She stared at them for a long moment before speaking. "The harangue has sustained significant damage across all sections. Hull breaches on decks 2, 4, 6, and 7. Most have been sealed, but 3 sections are still exposed to vacuum. The port engine is operating at 40%. Starboard engine is at 70%. Forward shields are completely gone. They will need a full replacement at a shipyard. Weapon systems are partially functional. We have lost missile tubes 1 through 6 and the forward pulse cannon." She paused. 17 crew members are injured, 4 of them seriously. "But sir, no one died. Not a single person." Taeho closed his eyes. No one died. In a battle that should have killed all of them, not one person on his ship had been lost. He did not believe in miracles. He believed in good people doing their jobs well. And today, his people had done their jobs better than anyone had any right to expect. "Sir," Yuna said. "Incoming communication from the Selhari command ship. Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, the cracks still running down the middle, and the face of the Selhari commander appeared. He was tall, broad, with the dark blue skin and silver eyes that all Selhari had. His military uniform was covered in medals and marks of rank. He was one of the most decorated officers in the Selhari Empire. And right now, he was looking at Taeho with an expression that Taeho had never seen on a Selhari face before. "Respect." "Captain Taeho," the Selhari commander said. His voice was deep and slow, and his translator carried every word clearly. "I have commanded ships for 30 years. I have fought in 12 major battles. I have studied war my entire life. And in all of that time, I have never witnessed what I witnessed today." Taeho said nothing. He just listened. "One ship," the commander continued. "You took one ship into a fleet that should have destroyed you in minutes. You fought through them. You reached the station, and you stood between the enemy and 12,000 innocent lives with a ship that was falling apart around you." He paused. "My people are warriors. We have always believed that we understood courage better than anyone else in the galaxy. Today I learned that we were wrong." There was a long silence. Then the Selhari commander did something that shocked every officer on both ships. He placed his right hand over his heart and bowed his head. In Selhari culture, This was the highest sign of respect one warrior could give to another. It was almost never given to someone outside their species. You have the respect of the Silhari Empire, Captain, today and always. The screen went dark. Yuna looked at Tejo. Sir, the Runali Admiral is requesting to speak with you as well. And the Terevian Fleet Commander. And, she scrolled through her console. Actually, sir, I have 47 communication requests. From fleets, from governments, from news services across the galaxy. Tejo almost laughed. Almost. Tell them all I will speak with them later. Right now, I want to check on my crew. He stood up from his chair. It took more effort than it should have. His legs were stiff, and his back ached, and the cut on his forehead was starting to sting now that the adrenaline was gone. He walked across the broken bridge, stepping over debris, and stopped at each station. He stopped at Jiwoo's console first. The young engineer looked up at him, with tired eyes. Sir? The ship should have died 100 times today, Tejo said. The only reason it did not is because of you. You held this ship together with nothing but your brain and your hands. I have never seen anything like it. Jiwoo blinked. For a moment her tough expression cracked, and she looked like what she was, a young woman who had just survived the worst day of her life. I was just doing my job, sir. No, Tejo said gently. You did much more than that. He moved to Dae-sun. The weapons officer was leaning back in his chair, his big hands resting on his legs. He looked tired but satisfied, like a man who had done hard work and done it well. Every shot counted today, Dae-sun. Those electronic warfare missiles at the flagship. That was the moment that saved us. Dae-sun shrugged his broad shoulders. You told me to hit the right spot. I hit the right spot. He moved to Hana. The pilot was still in her chair, her hands now resting in her lap. She looked up at him when he approached. That last moment, Tejo said, when the flagship fired and you moved us out of the way. How did you know when to move? Hana thought about it for a moment. Then she said, I did not know. I just felt it. Tejo nodded. That was Hana. She did not explain things. She just did them, perfectly, when it mattered most. Finally he turned to Yuna. His first officer stood at her station, straight and proper, despite the exhaustion written across her face. You kept this bridge running when everything was falling apart, Tejo said. You kept me informed when the information was coming too fast for anyone to process. You never lost your calm. Not once. Yuna met his eyes. I lost it once, sir. Right at the beginning, when we saw the fleet. My voice shook. Tejo remembered. And then it stopped shaking. Yes, sir. Because you decided to go forward, and after that, there was no room for shaking. He looked at all of them. His crew, his people, humans. They were small compared to the galaxy. Their ships were not the biggest. Their technology was not the most advanced. Their empire was not the oldest. But they had something that could not be measured by any of those things. They had the willingness to go first, to stand up when everyone else sat down, to fly into the fire when every logical thought said to stay away. Not because they were foolish, not because they did not understand the danger, but because they believed, deeply and stubbornly, that some things were worth the risk. Hours later, when the harangue finally began its slow journey home, limping through space, with half its systems broken, and its hull scarred from bow to stern, the galactic news channels carried the story to every corner of civilized space. Every species heard about it. Every world watched the footage. Every child in every school on every planet learned about the day one human warship charged into an impossible battle and changed everything. And in the halls of the Galactic Council, where diplomats and politicians had spent years debating and arguing and accomplishing nothing, a new phrase entered the common language. When someone talked about doing the right thing even when it was dangerous, even when it was hard, even when no one else was willing, They would say, "Be like the harangue." The ship reached home port 3 days later. It was met by a crowd so large that the docking station could not hold everyone. People cheered. Ships in orbit flashed their lights. Messages of thanks came from 100 worlds. Tejo stood on the bridge as the harangue settled into its dock. Through the viewport, he could see the faces of the people waiting for them. He could see their gratitude, their pride, their tears. He turned to his crew one last time. "We go home now," he said. "Rest, heal, see your families." He paused. "And then we come back. Because the galaxy will always need someone willing to go first." The crew of the harangue walked off their battered ship, stepping from the broken metal corridors into the warm light of home, carrying with them the knowledge that they had done something that would be remembered for a very long time. Not because they were heroes, but because they were human. And humans always go first.